of the circumstances which led me from the soot-stained cobblestones of London to the cyclopean horrors beneath the Giza sands, I can speak only with a trembling hand and a soul made desolate by remembrance. Let the world cling to its comfortable illusions of a rational universe, wherein cause followeth effect in orderly procession, and the mind of man remaineth sovereign over all mysteries that present themselves to his inquiring faculties. I have seen otherwise. I have beheld the veil rent asunder, as though it were but gossamer before the talons of some vast and nameless thing, and I have looked upon the great unblinking eye that watcheth from the spaces between the stars, from those lightless gulfs where neither time nor dimension holdeth sway, and where the very geometry of existence conformeth to laws that would shatter the sanity of the most hardened philosopher. My name is Silas Vane, though that appellation now seemeth to belong to another man entirely, a man who walked the gas-lit streets of the empire's capital with purpose in his stride and reason in his breast. I was once a man of the lever, the pulley, and the gauge, a devotee of that mechanical philosophy which held that every mystery of the earth might be solved with a steady hand, a sufficient charge of black powder, and the rigorous application of empirical method. I served Her Majesty as a sapper of the Royal Engineers, and in that capacity I had borne witness to the opening of mountains and the bridging of chasms that lesser men had deemed impassable. I had measured the tensile strength of iron and calculated the trajectories of shells, and I had believed, oh, how fervently I had believed, that the universe was but a grand mechanism awaiting the touch of human understanding. But logic is a fragile armor when one is besieged by grief. It is a fortress built upon sand when the tide of loss cometh rolling in, black and inexorable as the waters of Lethe. My Clara was fading, my dear, sweet Clara, whose laugh had once filled our modest rooms in Whitechapel with a warmth that no hearth fire could equal. The physicians called it the pale wasting, though they might as well have called it the reaper's gentle kiss, for all the succor their Latin nomenclature provided. I watched her breath grow shallow, each inhalation a rattling, agonizing staccato that seemed to mock the steady rhythm of the clock upon our mantelpiece. The roses had fled her cheeks, leaving behind a pallor like unto fresh fallen snow, and in her eyes, those eyes that had once sparkled with such vivacity, I saw the creeping shadow of the abyss. It was in this state of desperation that Dr. Alistair Thorne found me, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he was sent to find me. I know that now, though I did not know it then. Thorne was a man of singular aspect, tall and gaunt, with a scholar's stoop and eyes that burned with the fever of obsession. He had been a fellow of the Royal Society in his younger days, I was told, before his researches into certain antiquarian subjects had rendered him persona non grata amongst the established men of science. He spoke to me of an Eye of Ra buried beneath the sands of Egypt, of an alchemical substance called the vital ether that had been employed by the pharaohs of the most ancient dynasties, and of the possibility, nay, the certainty, as he would have it, that this substance might restore my Clara to the fullness of health. I did not see a madman when I looked upon him. I saw a door. The excavation at Giza was an affront to every law of archaeology that I had ever absorbed from my readings of the learned journals. Where legitimate expeditions proceeded with caution and meticulous documentation, ours advanced with the haste of grave robbers fleeing the dawn. Where proper scholars sought to preserve and catalog, Thorn sought only to penetrate, to drive ever deeper into the bowels of the earth with a single-minded intensity that bordered upon the sacrilegious. He had secured our permissions through channels that I dared not inquire after too closely, and he had assembled a workforce of fellaheen whose eyes held a curious vacancy, as though they labored not for wages, but for some compulsion that had been impressed upon their very souls. Chief amongst our guides was the dragoman known as Abbas, and of this personage I must speak with particular care, for in him was concentrated all the sinister portent that I failed to recognize until it was far too late. He was a man of indeterminate age, with skin the color of burnished copper, and eyes that were far too wide for his narrow skull, eyes that seemed to absorb the torchlight rather than reflect it, and that moved with an unsettling independence, as though they were tracking movements invisible to normal sight. He spoke English with a curious accent that I could not place, and he smiled with a frequency that grew more discomfiting the longer one knew him. It was Abbas who directed us to bypass the known tombs, the chambers of Khufu and Khafre that had been picked over by generations of European explorers, and to strike deep into the substrata of the plateau itself.
The pharaohs were but children playing at the hem of their mother's robe,
he said in that lilting, hypnotic cadence of his.
What you seek lieth deeper. What you seek was old when the first stone was quarried for the pyramids.
We descended through a trench that felt less like an excavation and more like a surgical incision into the very hide of the world. The limestone gave way first to sandstone, and then to something else entirely. A rugose, calcified matter that was neither stone nor bone, but seemed to partake of the qualities of both. It was arranged in layers that spiraled downward in a pattern that suggested organic growth rather than geological deposition, and it hummed with a low-frequency vibration that I could feel in my very marrow. My instruments registered nothing anomalous, yet my body knew that something was profoundly wrong with this place. The air grew thick and close, carrying with it a scent of immense antiquity, not the musty decay of Egyptian tombs, but something older, something that spoke of eons when this land had lain beneath warm and alien seas. We dug for 7 nights, always by torchlight, for Abbas insisted that the work could not proceed beneath the scrutiny of Ra.
The sun sees too much,
he said,
and what it sees, it remembers. we must be forgotten.
I confess that the nights blurred together in my recollection, each one distinguished from its predecessors only by the increasing strangeness of the strata through which we descended. On the third night, we breached a layer of what appeared to be fossilized vegetation, but vegetation of a species unknown to any botanical catalog, with fronds that spiraled in patterns suggesting mathematical rather than organic growth. On the fifth night, we discovered bones, not human bones, not animal bones, but something between and beyond both, arranged in a circular pattern that suggested ritual burial by hands that were not quite hands. And on the seventh night, as our picks struck the final layer of that rugose calcification, I heard for the first time the sound that would haunt my dreams for whatever remained of my natural life. A low, rhythmic throbbing, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, rising from the darkness below. At the stroke of a moonless midnight, on the 8th night of our labor, we reached what Abbas called the socket. The chamber into which we emerged defied the expectations instilled by a lifetime of rational education. It was hemispherical in form, perhaps 200 feet in diameter, and the walls were plated in a black, vitreous obsidian that seemed to drink the light of our torches and give back nothing save a faint, oily sheen. The surface was not smooth, as one might expect of volcanic glass, but was instead covered in bas-relief carvings of such maddening intricacy that the eye could not rest upon them without experiencing a sensation of vertigo. They depicted forms that were not quite human, engaged in activities that were not quite worship, before entities that were not quite gods. The proportions were wrong in ways that I lacked the vocabulary to describe, and the perspective seemed to shift as one moved about the chamber, as though the images were not fixed but merely suggested, as though they were windows into some dimension where Euclid's postulates had never held sway. In the center of this abysmal space stood the door. It was a massive circular valve of some leathery mineral that I could not identify, set vertically into a frame of the same obsidian that lined the walls. It rose perhaps 50 feet from the floor to where its upper curve kissed the apex of the dome, and its surface was worked into concentric ridges that radiated outward from a central point, like the growth rings of some inconceivable tree. And it pulsed. There is no other word that captures the horror of what I witnessed. The door pulsed in a rhythmic, sickening cadence, expanding and contracting by fractions of an inch with a regularity that suggested not mechanism, but metabolism. Thorn was beside himself with exultation.
"The seal of the eye!"
he cried, his voice echoing in that cyclopean space with a quality that seemed to multiply and distort his words.
"Intact after all these millennia. Fetch the gelignite vein. We must breach it before the conjunction passes."
But I refused. I had spent my career working with explosives, and I knew the folly of employing such crude methods against a structure whose properties were utterly unknown. More than that, I had heard something that Thorn, in his frenzy, had failed to perceive. The door was breathing, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but with the actual aspiration and expiration of living tissue. I pressed my ear against its leathery surface and felt the warmth of it, the yielding give of something that had once been, or still was, alive. "There must be another way," I said, and I reached for my tuning forks. It is a peculiarity of my training that I have always possessed an acute sensitivity to resonance. As a sapper, I had learned to listen for the hollow ring that betrayed a hidden chamber, the particular vibration that indicated a flaw in a span of iron, the telltale hum of an underground water source. Now I applied that faculty to the blasphemous membrane before me, striking my forks and pressing them against its surface, searching for the note that would unlock its secrets. The work consumed hours. I cycled through frequencies that ranged from the deepest bass to the highest treble, and the door responded to none of them. Thorn grew impatient, then furious, then resigned to watching my efforts with the hollow eyes of a man whose hopes are dying. Abbas alone remained calm, standing in the shadows at the edge of our torchlight, with that perpetual smile upon his too wide face. It was near dawn when I found it. Not a note precisely, but a chord. A dissonant, non-Euclidean harmony composed of 3 tones that should not have been able to coexist, that violated every principle of acoustic theory I had ever learned. When I struck those 3 forks simultaneously and pressed them against the door, the effect was immediate and terrifying. The valve did not swing, it did not slide, it dilated. It peeled back in wet, concentric rings, like the iris of some vast, diseased eye opening upon the darkness within. The sound it made was indescribable, a combination of tearing, sucking, and sighing that seemed to emanate not from the material itself, but from some space beyond it. A gust of air rushed past us, carrying with it a cold so profound that I felt the moisture in my nostrils crystallize, and a scent that I can only describe as the smell of deep space, of absolute void touched by the radiation of 1 billion dying suns. Beyond the dilated aperture lay the inner sanctum, and there, embedded in the far wall of obsidian, was the eye.